Okay, well, I'll go downstairs and listen. Use this if you need to make an announcement. I'll go check. I'll go check with them.
I was hired by a publishing company that Xerox owned at the time to manage a project they were doing with Park to learn the system that was being built there, take it back to the publishing company, and have people at the publishing company use it. I wrote a letter of resignation and said, this is not a project that you should be doing, period. That letter found its way to Bob Taylor, who was running the computer science lab at the time. I sat down and spent some time with Bob, and he basically said, well, why don't you figure out what it is we should be doing? That was when I started working with Larry Tesler. The way we went about the design was to actually work with the editors at GIN. I went back, I spent several weeks with them and put them in front of an imaginary display with a real keyboard and a real mouse, and asked them if they could sort of walk me through imagining using that hardware to edit. And once Larry and I hit on this idea of having people talk about how they would want to do the work they did today, but with a new set of tools, the design itself became pretty simple as well, because there was a methodology that came out of it. Somewhere in one of my notebooks in Xerox, there is a bar napkin with one of the first desktop metaphors. We had this very intuitive text editor, and we were working on what we thought was going to be a very intuitive page layout system. But we were still stumbling, all the users were still stumbling around things like filing and printing and deleting. As I was thinking about this, it just occurred to me that there was no reason why we couldn't use the same approach and build an environment that allowed people to move documents around in the same way that we were allowing them to move text around inside a document.
That's not playing.
Okay.
Is it working now?
Again, I'm just going to keep tapping, go downstairs, and see if it comes out there. How about you? Okay, he muted his audio there. Is this turned? Is it turned up here? Oh. Everything seems to be correct. Okay, all right. Okay, great. Hopefully you can just refresh that. Nope, still offline. Just open a new tab, Gmail, something like that, just to trigger it. Okay. Okay, and then turn up your volume here. Test, test. Yep.
Okay, sorry for the small delay, but the $7 item was successful, and we now have this mirrored downstairs with the right audio. So if you want a more comfortable seat, or you want to be at a lower elevation to hear HCI, you can go down just the second floor, room 220. There's a lot more room as we work on sort of better ways to accommodate folks. But I don't want people to feel like they have to sit on the floor and be uncomfortable. We're going to get to that. Also, I know a lot of people, we still haven't made final decisions about enrollment. I will say something about that today. But there's way more. You will still be able to hear me. You'll see the slides. You'll just not be able to smell me. So if that's important, you need to stay up here. It's probably not. So you should just be fine going down there. My smell will not be on the midterm. And I'll give you a minute to get adjusted. I apologize for, we just had a little bit of back and forth, but we're good now. All right, we're back from the weekend. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things. We're going to mainly be talking, today's topic is really about the design cycle. So we'll be talking about that. Fair warning, there's some scary interfaces we're going to look at here. If that's going to be a problem, then you might want to leave the room. Here's basically the agenda of announcements, and there's also what we're going to be lecturing about. Remember, Thursday, I meant to, but Wednesday. Next Wednesday, there's a reading response due that obviously all of you went through this process once, so today's was due today before class. Everyone did that triumphantly. We try to post them at least a week out. I will try to keep to that so that you have a whole week of planning. There's sometimes multiple readings. You're responsible for all of them. You only usually have to respond to one because sometimes they're not all related. And I think now also just a reminder is the design assignments. I'm just going to keep reminding you so it doesn't sneak up on you. December 3rd before class, that's the go out and talk to people. I will say something more about that. Programming 1. People, how did section go? I found out the sections were pretty packed. Good group. Yeah, awesome GSIs. I'm telling you, this is a cool group. This is the year to take this class. Okay, enrollment. Let me come back to that. We're not accepting late reading responses. Some people ask. It's just too hard to grade late reading responses. The grading policy for everything else I went over on the first class. The reading responses, remember, are only graded on a 0, 1, or 2 scale. For that. What section will you attend? We are going to make some final decisions tomorrow. We have a staff meeting for all of the CS160 staff. Please go on Piazza and vote which section you would attend. We're trying to do some load balancing, and ideally if we can consolidate, that's helpful, but we will do whatever it takes to accommodate so that everyone can attend section. Okay, so enrollment, it looks like we are likely to take more people. We had at least 30-something people that were enrolled that failed to show on the first day, so they'll be dropped. Once that happens, then I can put more people in the class. I'm hoping that will take place in the next day. The drop request already went in, and then I can start filling slots. So I would like to resolve this sooner rather than drag it out. I know people are trying to finalize their schedule and they don't know whether or not they're in this class, and I've already given out some assignments and it's not fair to have you do it and then drop you. So I'm hoping again tomorrow at this staff meeting we can make the final decisions on how many people we can take. But we can take some more people. We'll be just pulling off the wait list in wait list order. So if you were number like 105, you're not going to get in, and I can just tell you now. If you're number like 1 or 2, very likely, right? So we'll figure out what's going to, I don't know where the cutoff will be. All right. Okay. Also, if you want where to go and look for things, most of the discussion goes on Piazza. I wish this was all in one place, but here's the logic behind this. B courses is good for posting the assignments. You're submitting the assignments, and we can sort of put some of the grades up there, things like that. Piazza is good for having class discussions. People tend to like that better in terms of the way they can discuss and kind of go back and forth with team members. And I keep this website here for the class where you can look at the actual syllabus in terms of what's due when and what are we doing today in class and things like that. Also, the readings I usually post on B courses. We put them there because some of them are obviously have copyright issues. I can't just post them on the public internet. Questions about that? Okay, let's dive in so we get some material. So a little overview again of what HCI is, this design cycle, this idea about kind of this iterative loop of designing, prototyping, and evaluating. We'll talk a little more about, remember the theme is sort of mobile computing with smartwatch interfaces. There will be some, a couple things that might have also come up is, I mentioned that we're going to be forming the groups for you. There's some reason for that because obviously, I think I mentioned before, but if it's, I've tried the experiment of everyone just find their own group, which is just, people don't diversify enough, and it's much more interesting to put people together that have really different skill sets because they complement each other nicely, and the final projects are inevitably better. And people often come to me and say, I made some cool new friends that I wouldn't have normally made if I just picked my friends. Some people want to kind of get together and they go, hey, I have this cool idea for a startup, and I'm going to take this class, and then I'm going to do this great project. But things from here can definitely turn into startups, but the point is to not sort of have your project pre-picked. You'll have a very wide latitude, but it will not be do whatever you want under the entire universe. There'll be some design constraints. So constraints are our friends, and that's what we want to use. So we'll talk more about that thematically when we get close to it, but it won't be, there'll be definitely some things out of bounds because they're either less interesting, there's already a ton of products or designs in that area, and there's less room for kind of design and innovation. Because ultimately, yes, I know a lot of you are, I want to make sure I get an A in this class. I hope that too, but I'm also more interested, honestly, in you having a great portfolio piece to show. So if you're talking to, graduate schools or startups or any future job that you can say, look at how I thought about this particular space with my team. This is the way we kind of did some design sketches. We talked to people. You'll have this really nice story to tell about some really compelling design example, and it'll showcase how you think about computing and design. Okay, and I already mentioned this course mechanics thing. So we also did put out the next reading assignment, and some of them will be a little different. So sometimes it's respond with text, sometimes it's respond with sort of sketches or drawings and things like that. So you'll want to pay attention to that. So this one's reading about a really brief history of smartwatches. This is mainly so you understand the kind of bigger scope of where these smartwatches have come from. We will talk about this on Wednesday. Usually the readings reflect what we're talking about that day. So on Wednesday, we'll talk about smartwatches. And it's asking you, this already was posted over the weekend, so you should be able to see it on B courses. Just reviewing, because we went through it quickly, is you should think about this first assignment, this Watches in the Wild. So they'll be going over a little bit more in section and also post some notes on how to approach people and talk with them. This is a new thing for a lot of people. We realize that. We will sort of help you along the way. The rules are basically to not interview people that are your sort of roommates and things. You should go and find people in public. It's very approachable being a Berkeley student. For a while, as I mentioned, the first class I used to work at Intel, the computer company. People were very like, wait, why is Intel talking to me about, what coffee I buy or, what I do in the kind of kitchen or things like that. But being a Berkeley student, people are like, oh, I want to help. What are you doing? Okay, yeah, I'll tell you some information. So we'll give you a little handout for tips for that. But I think it's pretty clear, observing people, learning to watch for things. There's actually a lot of things in this class that we'll ask you to look at, and hopefully your eyes will open to things and how people use technology. And then brainstorming and prototyping. It's one thing is we gave you some examples. I think it's not really to implement those examples. We want you to really brainstorm these 12 ideas, I think is what it says, and think go for like really breadth. And we'll talk a little bit about brainstorming today, but it's not as if we're looking for small things like, well, we talked to these people that, you know, work at this cafe, and we thought, well, maybe if they had something that had a small little, the font was changed, or maybe it was like the labeling was a little different. And just those iterations are kind of small. Think very broadly. What are these people telling you is hard for them? What is something that could be a compelling new experience? And it's okay to go a little outside the bounds of what's possible. Now, what I mean by that is something that's very near term, like maybe there's not exactly the smartwatch or kind of those features aren't available. As a designer, you should be able to say, wow, this is a really compelling case of why we need you know, whatever, a humidity sensor, because if we had that, someone cooking in the kitchen could like wave their hand over it and instantly tell if the water's boiling. I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, but it's like kind of things that might be compelling as a sensor or some kind of feedback. Prototyping it, again, this is where you get to have a little bit of fun with paper and cardboard. So I meant to wear my cardboard watch today, but basically, if you just even cut out some kind of picture, some watch out of cardboard, you put little sticky notes in the middle, it can be a little watch that you can draw screens on and have people give you feedback. So I'll try to remember to bring that on Wednesday to show you. And it's pretty clear, the grading's pretty clear on this, and it's all on B courses, but it should be, you know, did you actually succinctly give us enough ideas? Did you pick one? Was there justification for it? Did you test it with the user by going back to them? Okay. All right, and crunch time, we already sort of went over, and they'll be going over more in section going this week as well. So this is the section, at least the first two sections are definitely more concentrated on getting you up to speed to do programming too. There'll be a little bit of information about the design assignment. So if you need help, all the GSIs I think have posted office hours. So you're welcome to that. And then I have office hours tomorrow as well. There's also a bunch of tutorials. So if you are a person that can easily kind of spin up to speed, you can look at these online. Okay, so let's talk about some new content and what we have to look forward to. So we're going to talk a lot about different interfaces, interface design, and different kinds of interactions. So let's just kind of warm up. Duck low. Okay. All right. So let's just kind of, what's wrong with this particular interface? Who's experienced something like this? Yep, okay. What's the problem with this? Yeah, the password's just kind of there in with everything else. Yeah, you can't copy paste that. I mean, I didn't really give you that information, but typically it's hard to copy something out of this kind of a dialog box. Yeah, if you just happen to go by that, whoops, okay. Well, thanks for the memories. That's not going to happen. Right, so it's the differentiation between an L or a 1 or a 0 or the letter O, these are all kind of concerns. So one thing is, so when we look at these kind of interfaces, it's putting excess burden on the user to kind of basically, you know, to save this and remember something. And much later we talk about cognitive load and things about how you kind of burden the user. So you don't want to offload things that the computer could do now. So most of us are used to these kind of password managers and other things, but this, in very recently and even older systems still do this. All right, let's talk about this interface. A little more similar. I know it's from like a number of years ago, but it's still, this is a sort of desktop metaphor. So what are some things in here that might be of concern? Or you can say things you like too. Yes. Yeah, top arrow, not clear. Let me actually like draw the discussion to those items. So what are things about those? How many people have a calendar in their room with spirals hanging on the wall? Okay, 3, 4, 5. Okay, how about a clock? Yeah, might have a clock in the room. What happens when we put these kinds of visual icons up? What happens as a result? Right. So they actually like have great. They have this legibility. They communicate immediately what they are. Like if I put a number up there, or even I tried to kind of, maybe if I said January, it says December. It's like December. Then you kind of get it. But by having this, it looks like something you're very familiar with. This is sort of a skeuomorphic interface. This is the sort of terminology that we're using something that is a physical object. We're embodying visual traits of it into the interface so that you, when you first encounter this, you won't have a learning curve to understand what that is. I know these are obvious examples, but there's tricks that you will see become problematic later. These are like the obvious ones. Now, that seems good. That seems like a good thing as a designer. If we can offload, we don't need a learning manual now. We don't need to have like an FAQ, like this is the date. That just reads, that's the date. What's the problem with it? Oh, right, it duplicates the date at the bottom. That's one kind of thing. You're using up screen real estate. Yeah. Well, we don't have this on a lot. How many people have something like this on their screen now? So somehow this kind of went away. Why did this go away? Yeah, it's pretty big. A lot of people don't want to give up, again, this kind of screen real estate. What else? Right, so there's definitely a design movement towards minimalism. So these things that are skeuomorphic, like, you saw this battle, it went down several years ago with a lot of the iOS applications that they were putting, leather on the side and things where like computers don't have leather. So there's a minimalist move. Right, so back to Eldon, they're saying that it duplicates things. So let me just, if you step back, maybe it's back to high school or something, but there's this thing on your wall. What do you do with that calendar, the physical calendar? Oh, go ahead. All right. It conveys the date. I won't be so hard. But yeah, there's other things you might expect it to do. Why can't I lift it up and look forward a couple of days? Mark things, dog ear it, tear the page off, take it with me, right? Now you might think that's ridiculous, but once you start introducing these themes where people start to have a preloaded knowledge of what that object is, you have to take the whole package. You can't just say, oh, but no, it's a computer. You can't rip that off. Well, I don't know. It's a spiral thing. Like, would it include the clock when I turn it up? Like all these things, like how realistic should it be? And I think some of that we can kind of understand, like that's a little bit over the top, but this is where a user will go when you start to give them these kinds of forms. So let's talk about the desktop metaphor for a minute. This is an interface that came up as a design that mimicked what the desktop would be. So there was originally, of course, I think most of you know, computing usually had sort of just a single screen, or maybe it was a couple screens, but it was largely text-based. And the insight was, what if the work that was done, again, people weren't thinking you would ever have this outside of an office setting, because who in the world would want a personal computer? Leave that aside. But at an office, you have a desk, and there's things you do on the desk, right? So, you put things in the trash, you kind of move things around. And you have folders. So this is the original drawing from the idea for what the desktop metaphor would be from a very long time ago. And our good friends at Xerox PARC, P-A-R-C, for Palo Alto Research Center, that come up continuously in this class, actually sort of started this concept. This is sort of a little video. I can't blow it up right now, so you have to deal with this, mainly the audio of this is Tim Mott talking about that.
I was hired by a publishing company that Xerox owned at the time to manage a project they were doing with Park to learn the system that was being built there, take it back to the publishing company, and have people at the publishing company use it. I wrote a letter of resignation and said, this is not a project that you should be doing, period. That letter found its way to Bob Taylor, who was running the computer science lab at the time. I sat down and spent some time with Bob, and he basically said, well, why don't you figure out what it is we should be doing? That was when I started working with Larry Tesler. The way we went about the design was to actually work with the editors at GIN. I went back, I spent several weeks with them and put them in front of an imaginary display with a real keyboard and a real mouse, and asked them if they could sort of walk me through imagining using that hardware to edit. And once Larry and I hit on this idea of having people talk about how they would want to do the work they did today, but with a new set of tools, the design itself became pretty simple as well, because there was a methodology that came out of it. Somewhere in one of my notebooks in Xerox, there is a bar napkin with one of the first desktop metaphors. We had this very intuitive text editor, and we were working on what we thought was going to be a very intuitive page layout system. But we were still stumbling, all the users were still stumbling around things like filing and printing and deleting. As I was thinking about this, it just occurred to me that there was no reason why we couldn't use the same approach and build an environment that allowed people to move documents around in the same way that we were allowing them to move text around inside a document. And we didn't call it the desktop, we called it the Office. We actually called it the Office Schematic, was the first name that it had. But it was very similar to the desktop metaphor that we see today.
Okay, so the Office Schematic, that's how you can like trip people up at your next HCI trivia party, right? So no, Office Schematic, man, come on. Okay, so I know that a lot of things, just as things that come up in this class, a lot of things such as this. So this is 45 years ago. It's hard to get the perspective on it because you often think, I don't know why this is so obvious. I know about this desktop metaphor. What I want you to do for a lot of the topics in this class, sometimes we'll be right on the edge, but sometimes we're going to be learning from the perspective standing at 45 years ago or 30 years ago and trying to think about what are the approaches they could use, what ones worked, what ones didn't work. So the desktop metaphor obviously is one that's huge. It had a huge adoption, and it really accelerated the growth of computing because of a lot of these issues. You suddenly didn't have to teach people how to print. It was like drag a document to the printer. Now dragging, you have to understand what that meant and the things that you would do. So let's see where things went. How about this interface?
Also, I can just pin up a document to the wall if I want to remember it for later, or write a sticky note like this note to call my mom. It's a fully 3D space, so I can click on the walls to change the view if I want to focus on a particular viewpoint, or go back to the normal desktop. And I can organize things just like I do on my real desk as well. I don't have to just use folders. I can use piles. I can throw a bunch of stuff into a pile, open it up into a grid, or flip through it as if it was a deck of cards with my scroll wheel.
Okay, good, bad, what do we think? We're designers, yeah. Right, so that's a good point. Let's just like play off of that for a second. So now we have all these virtual screens that you can choose from. They're usually at least laid out sort of horizontally most of the time. I know there's some other layouts. What is the advantage of laying this out to mimic sort of actual walls, like a real space? Right, yeah. So this was the design, at least concept was exactly that. It was, well, people are good at remembering locations of things. You know, you probably can think about your own room. Where is the to-do list, and where is the snack area, and where is the like all the cool CS160 homework stuff you do? You have like a visual memory of that. there's a little bit of a disconnect because although we're good at remembering that, it's often hard when the space is manipulating around you. What I mean is it's often, people have done studies that you're really good at remembering sort of even angles with your hands, but once you're presented with an interface like that, it's a little more challenging. So what, and the cluttered thing is another issue. Well, what's good about this? Is there anything good? No one wants to vouch for anything good. I mean, it does mimic the real world in some ways, yeah. Yeah, so maybe it was ahead of its time. Maybe the kind of the visualization and the immersion wasn't there because this is still looking at a flat screen. So as an example, there was a project a number of years ago where you'd use your phone and you would call people based on where you touched your body. So you're maybe someone that you really cared for, like your mother, you would touch your heart, call your mom. Boss, right? That was in the demo. I didn't make that up. That was in the demo. But the problem with that is you sort of run out of like, oh, you're my second best friend, lower thigh, outside high. I moved you up to like, you know, up here. I don't know. So, but physical kind of space also is really important. So it does play into physical memory. It does play into some of these elements. Okay. How about this? Got the futuristic music. I don't know if it's a plus or a minus. Okay, so I know, how many of you actually seen this work from Jeff Hahn, actually? Okay, so just as a aside, when he showed this was before the iPhone, this is before multi-touch really came out, and people were just like, whoa, this is, people were blown away. Jeff Hahn, actually, he just moved into San Francisco, so I'm gonna lure him over here, so maybe he'll get a chance to give you some early stories about this. Okay, so what's good about this? Right, so to make, you know, I know you all know this, but, you know, making things larger or moving them around, they're just gestures. That's really good. That seems to be much better than mapping to a physical device that's in sort of through a direction of a screen and a mouse, right? This is direct, more direct at least, a little bit. Wow, yeah. Wait, what do you, oh yeah, so in terms of like precision, you mean? Okay, physically touching it, yeah. Well, okay, what's not good? Well, I don't know, why are you not using this now? What's going on? We should have this, you're all telling me cool things. Right, it's not so cool to be typing. That doesn't, like, I mean, somehow the coolness factor goes down a little bit. What else? I do. Okay, maybe not in my house, but okay, yeah, no, okay. It takes up a lot of real estate, so there's often like, you know, we're talking about this size screen and this size screen and this size screen, so we haven't worked up these larger screens. What else? Yeah, it only works for certain kinds of tasks. So I think we already like, say typing is maybe difficult. So moving and sorting things seems to work pretty well. But a lot of other tasks, it's not general purpose enough that you would use it. So if you want to look cool or be in Minority Report, thumbs up, but other tasks, maybe not so much. Yeah. Right, so it didn't really, you can tell there's little tricks, but also like, what do these things mean? We've somehow already learned, you know, some gestures and tapping and multi-touch kind of things, but yeah, there's extra load to learn. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, this is, I mean, if you tried to, what are you doing? I want to send this email, but I don't want to put my hand down yet. You got to like do certain things. Like, how do you break away? It's hard to stand with your hands up in the air like that for any length of time. It's also hard to do kind of pixel resolution things. So if you really needed to align things, it's much easier even with a mouse or a trackball, any kind of other more kind of other input device than lining up with your hand. Now you can imagine zooming techniques and other things, but in general, it's very hard to get that level of precision, largely because, pun intended, a lot of hand waving, right? Okay, let's go for something less, super futuristic. How about this interface? Just standard font selection, pretty run-of-the-mill. Now, what's going on here? What's some design decisions that you can tell have happened here, either good or bad?
They're not showing you the fonts. Like they decided to just have a list in a single font.
Right. Okay. So there's only showing the fonts in just a standard typography, and you don't see what the font looks like. Also, how are they arranged? Okay. Well, I'll let you guys add some things. Sorry. Right. There's a lot of scrolling to get to where you want, and they're alphabetically arranged. Sorry. Say that one more time. Right. Okay. So there's a whole font family here that's all kind of taking up extra space. Now, what choices could you use? So here, we might as well, here's a different, so what's going to be hard with this is, it sounds like finding a font, you have to go kind of linearly through this list and really a little bit of fine motor control to possibly pick it out. Okay, well, let me just show you this another take on this, which you're also familiar with. So other programs, this was at least PowerPoint a little while ago, did the version I think you were alluding to earlier, where maybe you see a hint of what the actual font looks like, and they're arranged with, at the top, you can see there's some kind of separate ordering that they're coming up as sort of frequently used. Okay, do we like this? Do we not like this? What's our thoughts? Yeah. Right, so this is categorized now by font family. That seems to be good on sort of mainly your first kind of the way, you have to think of how a user might think about it. Like, I want a particular sans serif font. You go there, there's Gill Sans, and then you can maybe pick the actual sort of typeface you want. What's somewhat, now you're right also that you can't render these all in the font of the font, because basically a lot of them are just symbols, right? So you're not going to know what that is. You won't know what the name is. So that could be a problem. Also, the first version that I showed, you kind of always know where that font is to find it, whereas this is constantly moving things to the top for you. And the question is, what is the context? Is it only when I'm in that one particular application? Does it carry across and remember that when I'm also doing layout for, InDesign or PowerPoint or anything else? So they might not be applicable. So this idea of actually pulling them to the top is good, but also problematic. And I'm just trying to highlight that often in HCI, it's not like, oh, good, we got the answer. Definitely always put them at the top. It's really context dependent, and it depends on what the usage model is going to be. Okay. So let's talk a little about this design cycle now that we've kind of warmed up, looked at some interfaces, and sort of thought about how to start critiquing them. Now, you'll remember our famous picture that keeps coming up about this iterative design. We'll talk about designing, and prototyping and sort of evaluating things. Now, the thing about HCI is it's kind of, I've heard people describe it's like making sort of souffle, where I can tell you what all the ingredients are, but there's really, it's in the execution. So yes, you're going to get a sense in this class of here's the kind of general parameters, here's the tools, but it's really in the execution of those as how good design is made. And through this iterative cycle, this helps you get more information from the user and come up with essentially better designs. So you get to also make tasty souffles if that's important. Okay, so here's a little bit more expanded out version of that. And you'll notice the first thing is that the implementing anything doesn't even occur till level 6, right? So step 6, so to speak. And I think you want to remember that, because in a lot of classes it's sort of, all right, get going right away, start coding. And believe it or not, we're saying don't start coding for a while. So let's just walk through things that would happen in each of these cycles. And we kind of double back during the rest of the semester and deeper into all of these. So acceptance. Okay, so this means basically that you're actually going to decide that you're going to accept this particular design challenge, what you're going to do. For this, it's mainly because, you know, all these things. There's a deadline that you might not be able to meet. Is there going to be a reward? Is there a grade? That's probably why you're here. Could be money, could be something else. But you could also be forced to, right? This happens sometimes. I'm just forced, I gotta accept this. But you need to go through this acceptance phase to know you're going to actually be doing this design. And commit, do you have the right resources in terms of team and responsibility and time? So the next thing is to really think about the analysis of what you're going to be doing. So understand who the users are and what their tasks are. And you'll see, this is where you're going to spend time learning from the students and observing them and testing them and not guessing what they might want, but really you'll get a chance to not only take measurements, set up experiments, interview and observe people. That's how you're going to think about analyzing this. And some of the tools are things as simple as just a notebook or phone for taking pictures. You'll look, there's a picture of someone just sitting doing some task, and the point is really to say, you're gonna start looking at not just, hey, how do they use their calendar, or how do they use their, schedule food to be delivered. You look at all the things around them. What are all these other objects? What are the way that they use them? Do they have specific meaning? Do they move them to kind of give them reminders or things like that? The next thing is to kind of figure out what the definition of the thing you're probably designing. What is the problem you're actually focusing on? So you want to choose the sort of appropriate level of detail. So for this example, there's a picture of a bicycle there. So you might say, oh, our teams come in, we needed to sort of design cup holders for bicycles. And in this example, the framing is much better if you say, well, actually, the problem is cyclists drink coffee. We don't want them to have accidents while they're drinking. That's really what the problem is. Because maybe it's not a cup holder. Maybe it's something very different that you should design. If you set the problem wrong in the definition, you kind of limit the design space. So then I guarantee if you say, we're designing cup holders, all your examples will be cup holders, and maybe you missed out on other designs. So just make sure you're defining the problem correctly, correct framing. And this is what you're doing in this first design assignment a little bit. So some of these will seem familiar as you walk through it. So the other one is to kind of come up with a bunch of different ideas. And this is where you're brainstorming all of these ideas based on the kinds of observations you've made, this analysis, the problem framing. And you'll notice these are brainstorming rules, which we'll go over again in slightly more detail when we get close to this class brainstorming assignment. These come from IDEO, but there's lots of different schools of thought on this. But things such as stretching your mental muscle, loosening up with simple games, we'll get a chance to do that. Do your homework so you know what the existing kind of landscape of designs look like. Getting really physical, that's why this building is awesome, because we get to be physical. We move around, we will actually not even be sitting, we will be standing and moving around and using the walls and all the surfaces here. And a couple other rules, which again we'll go over, is having kind of one conversation at a time in the group, so it's not as if one person's dominating. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more. So you'll eventually come to some point where you want to select the final idea. And this is where it becomes challenging to kind of balance all the things that you've had and figure out what you actually want to do that'll address the problem you've set up, what the target users will be. Is this requiring some specific hardware that may or may not be available to you? Does it fit that? And things such as cost and the market come into play at this point when you're trying to rank them. And there might be different, usually you will pick sort of a top N of them, and even in your own assignment, sort of picking, you know, not the absolute top one. I'd pick a couple and then iterate around and do another pass. Then you want to implement it. And when we talk about implement, we don't mean actually you're going to code up everything. And this often involves at what level of fidelity you want this design to be at for this implementation. So sometimes we're doing these very lo-fi. That's what you're doing for this first assignment. You can just make something quick out of paper, sticky notes, cardboard, very simple, low fidelity, cheap, dirty. And that you can sort of get a quick idea of how it would look or feel. We'll talk more about that. Or as you go up, we're going to be doing some things with maybe sort of Figma or Pixate or Framer. These are kind of like intermediate. You're not full-blown coding in sort of the actual architecture of the hardware, but you're using a prototyping tool to get the right look and feel. You're at a kind of medium fidelity. And then finally, you might go, let's make a high fidelity version. That will happen more towards the end, and that's what we're looking for kind of at the end of the semester. We'll really be pushing you to implement a lot of things at the highest fidelity and functionality. But you're going to waste time doing that if you do it too early. Okay, so sometimes this is like a classic example from web design where you would first sort of start off with site maps of how you might want the whole site to look and feel. You'd mock up some storyboards. You'd look at some schematics of how this might look, and then finally you'd want to do sort of final mock-ups. And the reason you go through these different fidelities is, you know, why would you think we wouldn't want to just do the highest fidelity first? If we know, we have our gut feeling that's the right one, why wouldn't we just do that? Like in what way? Developer bias in what way? Right, so definitely you might not be the best informed to make that decision because you haven't spoken to users. You also might have a bias because whatever, you like things a certain way and you're like, why wouldn't the users want it my way? My way is the best way. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you really, this cost bias, if you've sunken, you know how it's like if you spend the whole weekend coding something, you show it to your team and they go, I don't know if I really like this. You're like, no, we're sticking with this dude because I spent the whole weekend on it, right? That's what you're going to tell them. I know that's what you're going to tell them. You don't want to be that person. You want to go, hey, I mocked this up while I was getting, you know, Laval's pizza. It was like 30 minutes. What do you guys think? I got a couple ideas here. This is what I'm thinking about. What do you guys think? So you also will get people critiquing the wrong things. When you show someone that's a very polished final design, they're going to look at it and they're going to go, maybe the font should be a little more orange, I'm thinking, and this could be like underlined. I mean, people are not giving you the right kind of feedback. Yeah. If it looks too professional? Right, so they'll think that those things are not up for debate for change, and they won't sort of even suggest those things. Yeah, these are all good points. Okay, good. All right. So finally, you're going to evaluate this, and that means taking this out, and you get a chance to do a very sort of loose, dry run with this design. One assignment is now prototyping it, bringing back to people, and learning how to get some really quick feedback. And we're going to talk about different ways to do this as we go on in the semester, but just to hint at them, sometimes you'll be asking people to kind of think aloud, so to sort of tell you what they're thinking while they're using something. So this is an unusual thing. If you tell someone, can you look at your calendar now, or look at your email, and normally go, okay, yeah, I'm looking at it. What? But if you do a think aloud, they think out loud. They go, well, I'm thinking I'm going to look at my phone. It's the first thing I'm thinking. I don't know why I'm not thinking about my watch. I'm thinking about my phone. It's unlocked. I'm going to unlock it now. I'm pushing the button. It's not unlocking. Now I'm unlocking it. Now it's okay. It's now in my sort of chat app. Okay, now I'm hitting the button. I'm thinking, when did I last use it? Oh, I didn't use it for a long time ago. Now I'm sliding over to find the application. I don't see the icon on this screen. I'm looking at the next screen. Oh, it's down at the bottom. Remember, okay, so now I'm pulling up the mail. Oh, it's composing a message. Let me get out of that. Okay, I don't want to compose that. This is a think out loud, where someone's telling you everything they're doing and thinking. That gives you much more insight of how they're trying to tackle the problem, and that you can see where they get stuck. And we'll talk about different ways to do this. And it depends on, some of them have kind of higher fidelity and they require more time and you get higher accuracy out of them. But often you want a quick kind of almost gut reaction of how people are thinking about things. Did I tell you get to do acting in this class? Yes, there's acting and scene. So, one of the things you get to do is we talk about what's called Wizard of Oz prototyping. We'll go over it more later in the semester, but just like Wizard of Oz, there's the man behind the curtain. So often you get to play the role of a computer. Awesome. Okay, so what this means that often you can actually, and you get a little chance to do this if you want, even on this first assignment, where you can actually, you can talk them through some screens. If you make a little prototype of, now what you would see is, warning, the BART train is coming, and they go, oh, well, I would say, stop the train, and then they go, and you kind of change the screen, and you go, okay, the computer just changed the screen, it says, we're stopping the train for you, and you go, oh, thank you, great. You can kind of play that role of the computer giving feedback. Bad thing is, obviously, it's not like real time, and you have to kind of play this strange role. The good thing is, if you're doing think out loud, you can actually figure out what they're struggling with and where they want to go, and see if your system actually performs correctly. Was there a question earlier? Sorry if I slipped by. Okay. So again, this cycle you basically do over and over, and you kind of usually start off with more ideas, and every time you kind of do an implementation there, you have less and less. And so one of our goals actually is sort of the teaching staff is to try to bring you through this cycle enough so that you have a really solid project at the end. And I don't know, for people from like the last few semesters, certainly like last semester, we had kind of one extra cycle at the end, which I would say significantly improved all the projects. And so that's something we'll hopefully get a chance to do. Okay, so there are other methods. I'll mention one. This is waterfall method that's sometimes used in engineering design. What do we think of this? So this would be, you initiate something, there's some kind of application description, then you analyze that, there's specific requirements that you design a system and implement it, and you get a product. What do we think? Yeah, there's no iteration here. You waterfall, meaning you ain't going back once you make that decision. So this is kind of, on each step, you kind of make solid decisions that are really, really hard to back up from, either because of time or cost or other resource commitments. So there's other ones. So we're basically going to be kind of comparing mainly from the waterfall that has no way to get any feedback about what you're doing. It's kind of high cost and it's really not desirable. Okay. Let's talk about brainstorming for a little bit and critique. Who's been in some kind of critique before where you maybe stood up or had someone reflect or give you feedback about work in person rather than like online or something? Okay, all right, well this is, I think, one of the really great things about this class, and hopefully that's what your enthusiasm is also about taking it, is we try to do as best we can with a class this size, giving feedback and critique, and you get a chance to do that with your fellow classmates. Now, a lot of you, some of you maybe think, well, wait, I just want to do really good design. I don't really, this seems like an extra thing. But in general, when you're giving a presentation or talking about your work, you're representing you as a designer and you as the kind of practitioner of what you're sort of trying to accomplish. And so you want to speak very confidently about it. You want to get people excited. You want to point out what the novelty is. All these things are really important. That's part of presenting the work. So even if you think, I just want to design stuff and then sit in the back room and my work will speak for itself, you are always trying to sell your work. Even if you're an artist, you're trying to sell kind of new ideas and new framings and new kinds of concepts. So being able to articulate what you're doing is important, as well as being able to kind of take questions and feedback on it. So that's a really great part about this class that I think. So let me see, I'm gonna skip this because I want to hit this at the end. So let's talk about brainstorming a little bit and some ideas around creativity. So one of the things that comes up is conformity. This is the big problem, and it sneaks in all the time. I'm guilty of this, and a lot of times this happens where it's the enemy of creativity because there's some conformity about branding and things like this. It's important to have a constant branding. That's not really what we're talking about. It's that somehow we get into these local minima about what we should be working on. There's this law, that Conway's law, that says the structure of a product or design will mirror the internal structure of the organization that creates it. And if you think about some of the products that you buy or things, you're kind of seeing a little bit of reflection of the culture of the company coming out in that product. So when there's some kind of rules to kind of conduct when you do this. So there's this natural pressure to conform. There's tons of psychological studies that have been done. They've brought people in and had them, you know, they've had people that are essentially in on the experiment. There's the one classic one is people came in, they were asked to identify which was the longest stick. There was one that was kind of quite clearly the longest stick, and 4 people came in and picked this one that wasn't the longest stick, and then you came in, and significant, you know, portion of the time, the person's like, I know that's not the biggest stick, but I don't know, everybody else is, okay, fine, I picked this one too, right? You have this natural issue to conform, and that's gonna happen sometimes in groups and classes, so we wanna try to move out of that, right? So people in the minority will often adopt the majority. I'm hoping that there's a reason why you want to sort of push back on that. So there are actually authentic people who will actually be dissenters of a sort of majority view. Do folks recognize this person? I have to show him in context, I guess, here. That's Stephen Breyer. He's a Supreme Court justice. Okay, not famous computer scientist. I know, everyone's like, wait, who was that? So often in the Supreme Court here in the United States, there's someone who writes the majority view and there's a dissenting view. Someone who actually dissents and says, we, or you know, some collective, we are not agreeing, we have a specific rationale we want to articulate. That's important that that's captured. In fact, that's what a lot of our democracy is based on, that we don't just say, that's it, game over, I don't want to hear about it anymore. It's like we have a conversation about it. We will accept, obviously, through this process what the law of the land is, but we are also acknowledging that there is a dissension about this in very specific pieces. So now, there's a couple things that happen sometimes that make the dissenting view doesn't work so well, and that is the dissent has to, if the dissent is not real. So sometimes you'll say, okay, let me just play devil's advocate here for a little bit, and you'll try to kind of play back something. Now, I'm not saying that you should not ever do that, because sometimes you want to think about what a user might come up with if they were coming from a different perspective. But it makes it seem less genuine when later you want to push an argument, because you're basically saying that, you know, you are playing a role rather than being genuine. So it's okay to do both, but just, you know, if you want to make a point, make the point and sort of stand by it and be really kind of confident in that. So, or if dissent is not encouraged. So sometimes you'll be in these meetings and it's all very good and happy, and hopefully you'll be the one to go, actually, I want to raise some points here. I think the design's going in the wrong direction. I think we're missing some opportunities. I would like to go back out to users. I think that, you know, just, you know, one more day of time for us to kind of iterate this is going to really benefit us. So question that throughout the semester as an individual and in your group as the person that wants to bring up, especially, this always happens in group dynamics, of course. Sometimes you need to come to decisions, and I'll give you some tips when we get into groups on how to do that. But you don't want to, what often happens, and you've probably seen this in groups in the past, is you all go, hey, I have all these ideas, and then you go, well, let's just take the lowest common denominator that we all agree on. And I guarantee you that's always a super weak project, right? It's like, Well, it's the thing that sort of delivers the stuff to you when you're good and connected. It's like, okay, it's like very, very bland. So you want to have things that have some edge, and probably a good project has some dissenters. I always tell my graduate students, if they were getting all their papers accepted at every conference, they're actually doing something bad, because we should be kind of pushing on people not accepting what we're doing sometimes as well. That lets us know that we are actually trying to push an agenda that might not, maybe they don't agree, they're not ready, or we really believe in, but we, you know, that's fine. We want to be kind of getting some things in and some things not in. So let's do this. Let's do a little quiz. So here's a little test. Think outside the box. So because you can't all come draw on the screen, we will just imagine our minds. Draw a series of 4 straight lines through all the points below without lifting the pen from the paper. So I'll give you like 10 seconds to think about this. Imagine some Jeopardy soundtrack playing. Okay. Right, so there's the solution, a solution. And obviously it's one of those things, like a lot of these games, where if you start to just think of it as a box with the alignment of the dots, and that's the first kind of bad framing, you're looking at it at the wrong framing. So it's a little kind of clever example of, you know, why this is usually hard. You sort of basically have some expectations and conventions about what that is. And that's the same when doing design. If you expect people to use their phone, use their watch in some way that's very conventional, that you're already sort of in trouble. You want to watch what's actually happening. So these are some of those rules from IDEO again, and yeah, we'll have a little bit of time to see this at the end, but and I'll review these when we get into the brainstorming side, but I want to walk through them a little bit here. You're mainly, when you're brainstorming, it is all about having quantity, right? So you're almost, you don't want to eliminate any ideas. You're really open to what you're doing. And the first thing you usually want to do is sort of just sharpen your focus. So this is, you want to make sure you have the right problem. We talked about that, like what we're going to do, what we're going to talk about, what we want to be brainstorming, you know, not too narrow, but also not too fuzzy. It's not like, let's design an app for students. That's way too fuzzy and broad. It's like, let's deal with this one specific issue of, you know, some struggle that someone's having. So again, it's back to the bicycles with the cup holders and the kind of accidents with drinking. When you start coming up with ideas, you want to usually write them down and number them. Numbering them mainly because you can kind of remember the order they were coming in, so you can say, oh, this was one we had from a lot earlier today. And also, it removes some ownership. So if you were maybe brainstorming with me, maybe you'd think, oh, it's a professor, he should have like the most points. Let's like his ideas. But it levels the playing field. So mine is idea 7 and yours is idea 2, and they're all kind of the same, and we can kind of play with them, and we don't have to worry about having some big ownership over them. And it has this sort of identity of their own. And also it has that, as you saw, kind of, let's get to 100 ideas. It kind of pushes an agenda of like, let's get there, it'd be really fun. So also this idea of building and jumping. So you want to keep some focus on an idea, but then you need to know when to kind of pivot out of that and jump to something else. So in this example, it's like, you know, imagine you're talking again about the bicycle idea. You're like, okay, maybe we need to have some kind of shock absorber that could do it. And you're kind of, maybe it would have like a spring or a shot. And you're like, okay, let's forget about all things that are about sort of reducing the amount of movement. Maybe there's another way. What about a lid on the thing? What about like other ways of doing that that don't involve kind of adding something with inertia or something like that, right? So how you can kind of pivot out. So like it says here, okay, what about a hands-free solution to something? So at some point, you're going to want to refine what the actual concept is you're working on. So what you don't want to do is reject early ideas. So sometimes this happens, you're in the middle of brainstorming, someone says, oh, it'd be funny if you had like bubble gum, and that was like part of it. Like, okay, we're not doing bubble gum. This is like a serious class. Put bubble gum up there. Bubble gum, we got it. Because often 30 minutes later, someone's like, oh, not gum, but like if we had an adhesive or something that was squishy, that would go with your idea from before, this idea 12, right? So you can often kind of pull these together, so you don't want to reject ideas too early. It says here, one big difference between good designers and great ones is the latter's ability to successfully develop unusual ideas. So hopefully we will all be the unusual idea folks here, okay? So throw out all those just random ideas that you think are nonsensical, because those are often, that's not the final design, but it gets you there. I always talk about it as if, okay, you might be over here and you go, we're not gonna design this thing, this is ridiculous. But now I see a cooler thing I wouldn't have seen from back there, because I'm talking about, you know, now something with grass and the park and digging, and now it's making us think about a different direction for this whole design. Oh no, my battery's gonna go out, but I'll stay alive here. The other thing is that the space remembers. So we're gonna get a chance to do this where we're actually gonna put things in this particular space, and we will put notes up, and if hopefully you have some space of your own, when you're designing, you wanna take pictures. It's the kind of like the RAM, if you wanna be computer sciencey about it, right? This is the random access memory that you can access the things in your space about what you're thinking about and remembering how you're working. If you look, we've done a couple brainstorms in my other class, Critical Making, downstairs in room 220. Maybe the group downstairs is sitting in that room right now. And you'll see lots of artifacts in that room from things we've been thinking about. So things like this, right? And you'll get a chance to do this as well. These are from pictures from a previous design cycle here. You want to stretch your mental muscle. Let's look at something. So we get a chance to do this. I'll give you some good examples again when we do brainstorming, but you can do your own. You want to have some kind of warm-up exercise using, you know, playing with, sometimes they'll have boxes of things that you can kind of play with, some objects to move around and talk about just to generate ideas. There's also warm-up games, which we'll get a chance to do some. One of them, which it just involves essentially opening up your mind to new ideas. And so I'll try to give you some examples of that when we get a little closer to that. But props are always key. A flat, bland table, no good. I mean, even earlier today, I sort of spilled out a bunch of just, I don't know, a bunch of random items onto a table, and the class had to make some things, and that just sort of injected another level of kind of what would happen in there. Okay. And this is again back to sketching and acting things out. This comes up in your presentations, but also when you're doing things, you'll say, you know, like I just said, like I want to imagine, like I'm going to call my mom. I touch here, Mom, right? You're going to act these things out. You have to have props to do that often. And even when you give presentations, there was, you know, for example, there was a group last semester that did a project around tracking drinking and dating. It's very complicated. I won't go into the details, but they had a little setup where they did a little skit of people on a date, and we watched them on a date and how they'd use this application and things like that. Okay. So this is some kind of space and designing and doing things, and doesn't get this dizzying. This is what the building looked like last year when we first started thinking about brainstorming. This was our brainstorming session last year when the building was just brand new. It wasn't this dizzying, but we sort of spread out in the whole room and people started throwing up ideas, and you get a chance to do this as well. Can someone lend me a power supply? Because I'm going to die here. Oh, okay. Pause for, is this gonna? Perfect. Okay. Someone throw me some power here. Actually, throw me down this cable. Could someone reach that right there? This thing, because I don't think I have. Oh, you got longer. Okay, I can get to something then. Okay. All right, here, give him that back. Sorry. There's, I can get back here then. Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you a short video now of a little bit about a design process at IDEO. So the framing is, this is really, so This video is from a little while ago, but I think that the insights and the way that they work and the kind of design techniques that they use are really instructive to how you should think as a designer. Okay.
There's an interesting distinction between design and invention. Whoever came up with the idea of dental floss, for example, was an inventor, but the man or woman who put it inside that clever little plastic box that lets you tear off just the right length, that was a designer. Now, how does the process of designing a better product work? And would it be interesting to watch that process? When we first broadcast this program back in February, we weren't at all sure what you would think, but judging by the number of you who ordered video cassettes of the program, and
I told you it was dated, video cassettes.
The industrial product design firm that is featured in this program, you liked it a lot. Here was the premise of the program. We went to IDEO, the product design folk, and said, take something old and familiar, like, say, the shopping cart, and completely redesign it for us in just 5 days. ABC News correspondent Jack Smith tells us what happened next.
9 in the morning, day one, and these people have a deadline to meet.
So welcome to the kickoff of the shopping cart project.
This is Palo Alto, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, and these are designers at IDEO, probably the most influential product development firm in the world. Designers are the reason TVs have square screens, chairs 4 legs, and toothbrushes nowadays those squishy handles. In fact, it was IDEO that designed those squishy handles. IDEO has designed everything from high-tech medical equipment to the 25-foot mechanical whale in the movie Free Willy and the first computer mouse for Apple. Smith ski goggles, Nike sunglasses, NEC computer screens. Hundreds of products we take for granted.
This is called the Neat Squeeze toothpaste tube, which
you invented that. The man who runs IDEO is Dave Kelly, a Stanford engineering professor with a Groucho Marx mustache, a dad of genius, and an approach to innovation that usually works.
Well, thank you, Fred.
But not always.
Thanks a lot. I can show you some products that failed. Came up with this idea called monster shoes, where you take these little monsters and lace them into your shoes like this. And we built a bunch of them, and I didn't want those either. So
mostly what IDEO designs, though, does work, and it works very well. Dave and his design teams create about 90 new products every year.
The point is that we're not actually experts at any given area. You know, we're kind of experts on the process of how you design stuff. So we don't care if you give us a toothbrush, a toothpaste tube, a tractor, a space shuttle, you know, a chair. It's all the same to us. We want to figure out how to innovate by using our process, applying it.
And so for the next 5 days, the team will apply that process to bringing the supermarket shopping cart into the 21st century.
I think first we should maybe all acknowledge that it's kind of insane to do an entire project in a week.
Project leader is Peter Skillman, a 35-year-old Stanford engineer. Project leader because he's good with groups, not because of seniority. He's only been at IDEO for 6 years. The rest of the team is eclectic, but that's typical here. Whitney Mortimer, Harvard MBA. Peter Coughlin, linguist. Tom Kelly, Dave's brother, marketing expert. Jane Fulton-Suri, psychologist. Alex Kazaks, 26, a biology major, who's turned down medical school 3 times because he's having too much fun at IDEO.
Kids climbing up and doing this.
Kids do that.
Safety emerges early as an important issue.
22,000 child injuries a year, and so they're hospitalized injuries. I mean, there are many others.
Not reported in the store. That's you actually have to go to the
that's
emergency room.
hospitalized. Right.
And theft. It turns out a lot of carts are stolen.
You know, what is the average life of a cart? Does it last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? And how big is this theft thing?
10 a.m. As the team works, it becomes clear there are no titles here, no permanent assignments.
And the other side says, gives us a lot of help, says, be safe.
Everyone appears to be equal, and they love to mock corporate America.
I'll give you status. I'll give you a big red ball on a post, and that says you're a big guy. If you got a ball, you're a senior vice president. You know, what do I care? The desk, the red ball, it's all the same. In a very innovative culture, you can't have a kind of hierarchy of here's the boss and the next person down, the next person down, the next person down, because it's impossible that the boss is the one who's had the insightful experience with shopping carts. It's just not possible.
According to Kelly, even employees who merely listen to the boss don't add that much either.
So you gotta hire people who don't listen to you, and that I don't think corporate America wants to hear that right yet.
I think we ought to start making those lists about the kinds of questions that we're going to ask.
The team splits into groups to find out firsthand what the people who use, make, and repair shopping carts really think.
Okay, go.
The problem with the plastic cart is the wind catches it. Yeah. And these things have been clocked at 35 across the parking lot.
Oh, man.
That's actually a pretty good point.
The trick is to find these real experts, and so that you can learn much more quickly than you could by just kind of doing it in the normal way and trying to learn about it yourself.
From everything I read, these things aren't that safe either, you know? So probably the seat itself is going to have to be redesigned.
What you're seeing here is the kind of social science, like anthropologists, you know, like you go and study tribes. What is it that they do that we can learn from that will help us design a better cart?
One of the interesting things for me is looking at how people really don't like to let go of the cart, except for the professional shopper, whose strategy is to leave the cart at various places.
In corporate America, many bosses like measure whether their people are, the good people or the people who are performing are the ones that they see at their desk all the time. That couldn't be further from the truth. The people who are really getting the information are out here talking to the buzzes of the world, going to meet other experts, much more useful than sitting at your desk.
3:30 in the afternoon, and the group is back at IDEO. There is no let-up.
Each team is going to demonstrate and communicate and share everything that they've learned today. People went off in the four corners of the earth and are coming back with the golden keys to the innovation.
A shopping cart has been clocked at 35 miles an hour traveling through a parking lot in the wind.
We were in the store, 2 hours, and it was truly frightening just to see the kind of stuff going on.
You got to designate some people to make damn sure that the store owner's point of view is represented.
After 9 straight hours, the team is tired. They call it a day.
So,
everybody cool?
Well, that's great. Thanks a lot. We had a great time today. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to try to skip to where the end part is. The whole thing is very interesting, but I'm going to get you to the punchline. So here they are mocking it up. This is
you pile hand baskets onto a high-tech cart.
And then, he waited and see if anybody complained. If nobody complained, another guy hung a bike up. And pretty soon, everybody's got their bikes up and nobody's complained, right? So it's that whole thing of trying stuff and ask forgiveness, instead of asking permission, is the way people come up with new ideas.
IDEO has such a reputation for innovation that client companies are increasingly asking Dave not just for new products, but also to remake their corporate cultures. You may be looking at the workplace of the future here.
It's one thing to be able to do a product once in a while, but if you can build a culture and a process where you routinely come up with great ideas, that's what the companies really want.
Okay, Peter, we're done.
Back at the shop, it is 6 o'clock, and the 4 mock-ups are ready for showing.
Baskets also can be, if you think you will have more volume baskets.
It is day 5, and Dave Kelly has no idea what the final cart looks like. Only the team does.
If they kind of got their heads down, they don't look at me, I'm nervous. If they say, wait till you see it, then I know we're in good shape. So I'm getting wait until you see it. I think that'll be good.
There it is! There it is! So we took the best elements out of each prototype, designed this entire cart in a day, and then this cart was fabricated in a day with an amazing team of people in our machine shop pulling this off, working in shifts throughout the night.
Wow, I'm impressed.
So are we.
The cart, which is designed to cost about the same as today's carts, is different in every other way. Hand baskets that stack in a metal frame, and major improvements for all.
You just lift the handle up, you drop put the children in, and then you can close the the handle right over them, and they instantly have some little bit of a work surface that they can play with.
What do you think?
Well, I'm very proud of the team. I think it's great.
Does this work for you?
Works for me great. Yeah. It's also beautiful. I mean, let's take it over to a local supermarket and see what they say.
Yeah, it works really well.
The cart's wheels turn 90 degrees so it can move sideways. No more lifting up the rear in a tight spot. And you shop in a totally different way.
Rather than taking your cart everywhere you go in the store, through a crowded store like this, it's much more efficient to take a small basket, rush around to where the particular shelves are, and come back and put them back. Put them here and treat this as like a center for your shopping.
And with a high-tech scanner, so that in the future you skip the checkout traffic jam.
Here's how you would scan an item. You reach over and pick up anything like the salad dressing, and I would scan it, and if I want to accept that item, I would just press plus and then drop it in my basket.
Because stores don't yet have those high-tech scanners the team designed, checking out today means doing it the old-fashioned way. But the bags are hung on hooks on the cart's frame. Remember, there is no basket here.
Why get rid of the big basket?
The basket is tyranny. The basket is tyranny because it's not really needed. If all your stuff ends up in bags, why need the basket in the first place?
Talk to me about theft.
There's no value in this cart without the basket because you can't carry anything in it. It's useless to anybody. You can't use it as a barbecue.
So it's not going to get stolen.
That's right.
So this ought to appeal to store owners then.
Yes.
I love it. I think it looks great. At
Yeah.
first, I was a little shocked, but I think you have some fantastic ideas here. It needs a little refining, but I think that it's great. I mean, we would want them.
It makes us feel great. And she also gave us some really good comments about how we can make this thing better.
Just wherever you are, look around. The only thing that's not designed by somebody is nature. So the trees are not designed by us, but everything you see, every light fitting, every flower vase, every scale, every stand for fruit, everything is designed, has to go through this kind of process. And they can do a better or a better or worse job of innovating or improving, but
Okay, so I'm going to end it there, but I want you to just take away a little bit from that because I had to skip through a little bit. I'll post the full link on Piazza, but they spent time watching users in the store. They thought about all the stakeholders, people that were, had kids, people that are running the supermarket. And then you'll notice they didn't think, how do I change the shopping cart? They're like, we need to change the whole experience. And they came up with some very radical changes. And like I said, you will never look at shopping carts the same either. You'll go, what is going on? Next time you're shopping, like, what strategy do I use? How do I move? Well, let me look around and see what other people are doing. All right, we'll see you all on Wednesday. We'll talk about smartwatches. Thanks, everyone. I have someone's charger, too.